Right, when we get to this stage, I'm happy with the drawing. I now like to seal it. So I'm up to the next step of my process. Sealing is basically a lovely way to put a foundation layer on, ready for the paint to adhere to. It also protects my drawing. I've gone to all this trouble to do an accurate drawing. The last thing I want to do now is smudge it and make it go all grey and I lose it all. The reason I've done an accurate drawing is because it helps the painting process. So I just take the excess graphite off with a tissue because I find that when you put your sealer on, in this case mine's a transparent primer, when you put that on, it can turn it all mucky grey. And again, what I do is I give it a nice good shake. It's a lovely milky consistency. It's actually very, very thick and creamy. And so what I do is I pour enough out so that I decanter it into this, so I pour enough out that I'll cover all of this area. I'm using a lovely soft brush. It's a golden nylon brush. This one's actually a number 24, and I want it to be really lovely and soft for this application. I dip it in and I start the process off, and I go outside the area where the painting will be. So I go outside my box and I make sure I cover every speck of the canvas. I'm giving it a protective layer, but the whole idea is giving it a good foundation layer for the paint to adhere to. I find that again, a building is only as strong as its foundations, and this is all part of that process. Again, I'm using, the method I'm applying it is I'm using both sides of the brush in a really, it's not a herringbone method, but what I like to do is make sure that I cover every pore or every part of the surface of the canvas. In a traditional way, what you do is you would put the gesso over the top of the canvas before you draw. What I like to do is draw onto my already pre-primed canvas, and then I seal the drawing in between the two layers. And this goes on. It's a creamy substance when it's wet, but it will dry beautiful and transparent, and I'll get to see my drawing underneath it. Traditional gessos are opaque, so I can't put a traditional gesso over my drawing at this stage because I would lose my drawing. I love the texture of this particular primer. It's not too gritty and it's not too slick. It's one of those, just rights. I make sure that I'm looking at an angle as well, so I can see exactly how much of the canvas or how much of the primer I'm putting on, so it's covering the canvas, and I'm leaving some of those lovely brush strokes in there. Again, I want it to be, the beauty of this primer is that it will retain the brush strokes, and that again adds to that illusion that this was painted with lovely thick paint. Again, I'm going outside the box. I want every part of this canvas covered. The reason I go outside the box is because it is a protective layer, so that when the painting does get eventually framed and stretched, the outside edges will be actually protected as well. I don't like to see large blobs of the primer, so I make sure that I take them out as well. All right, now all I have to do is I go and wash my brushes out. I've got to wash this brush out thoroughly in cold water, and that way it will retain its lovely soft hairs. If I let this primer dry on this, the brush becomes very, very unusable. And if I ever do that, I can always put it into a lovely brush cleaner. But at this stage, if I just wash this out in clean, cold water, it's ready to go for the next time. Okay, before we put paint onto our canvas, I thought I'd go through my equipment. Basically what I've got is a palette. Mine's a glass palette. It's actually just a 2mm piece of glass, and I put an edge around it. And I've just painted the back of it grey. I love it a mid-tone grey to paint on because it makes it easier for me to see my tones. It also helps me see the characteristics of the paint, so it will help show whether or not the paint is transparent or opaque. So I really love that mid-tone to paint on. It's not very big. It doesn't measure very big at all. It's probably 6 inches by 11 inches. And the reason it's not very big is for 3 reasons. One is that it allows me to get closer to my work. So it being quite narrow, it means I can get closer to my work for more detailed work. The other reason is that it forces me to clean it more often. Therefore, I'm avoiding getting dirty mixes or wrong mixes. So it encourages me to clean it a lot more often because I run out of places to mix my paint. And the third reason is that when I am painting away doing demonstrations or doing workshops, this palette comes with me and it fits into my travel easel. And so what it is, it's like taking a little bit of my studio with me wherever I go, and I feel very comfortable wherever I'm teaching in. It doesn't matter what environment. So my water containers are the same. It's a shallow water container, the same as what I use at home in the studio. I've got a brush holder exactly the same as I've got a brush holder in my studio, and the brushes sit up in exactly the same position as when I'm away. I've also got tissues, which are on my left-hand side. I use a lot of tissues when I'm painting in acrylics because it's the best way to keep my paints and my mixes clean, and it avoids, I don't go into the water as often, and what that means is I get thicker paint. So I use a lot of tissues, and again the tissue box fits on my travel easel. So the setup I have when I'm away is very, very similar to the setup I have at home. I love being front on to my work so that my mixes are front on, exactly the same as when I've got my travel easel. And the reason I like that is because I used to paint with the mixing area to my side. I had the taboret used to be on the side, and I found that turning constantly hurt my back, but it also slowed down my painting because even though it's minuscule from here to here or from here to here, that tiny little bit of difference in timing when I'm mixing, it speeds up my process. I look at my reference, I mix my paint, and I put it straight onto the canvas here. Whereas before, I'd look at my reference here, mix my color over here, and not quite know, and then I'd guess, and it slowed everything down. So by putting my palette in front of me, sped the process up. So I use golden nylon brushes. I use synthetic head brushes, and this particular brush, well, all of our brushes are golden nylon brushes. And the reason I love them is because they're very well made these days. They're strong, they're resilient, and they've got lovely spring in them. It doesn't matter what I do, it takes so much punishment, and they just spring back to the shape that I love. And that doesn't matter if they're wet or dry, they still spring back to a beautiful chiseled edge, and I love them for that reason. And that happens with it doesn't matter what, if it's a round brush, it doesn't matter what I do with it, it keeps springing back to a lovely point. So I love the golden nylon brushes, and the reason I like them as opposed to a hoghair brush, I find a hoghair brush is like, they're very coarse, and the hairs are a little bit more spread apart. So it's a little bit like picking up butter with a fork and trying to spread it. Whereas these brushes, the golden nylons, are so tightly packed with the fibre, it's like picking up butter with a knife, and you can pick it up and spread it, and I find it way easier to do that. I have very few brushes to paint with. In fact, I've got this brush sitting here. This brush here, I don't even paint with this one. This brush I use, it's part of my kit, but I use it to apply the primer to seal my drawing, and also use the same size brush, but not the same brush, to apply my varnish to. So this brush I rarely paint with, but the main brushes I use would be these 3 brushes here. I use this lovely, this is a number 2 round brush. Really great for my detail work. This is what I paint a lot of my face work with, this one little brush. My workhorse brush is a number 4 filbert. A filbert brush is shaped a little bit like a cat's tongue. It's a lovely, versatile brush. You can paint lovely lines with it if you turn it on one, and then you just flip it around 90 degrees and you get a lovely flat. I just love filbert brushes. They're a real workhorse. Brushes are a personal preference. Again, the reason I use them is because it suits my method of painting. Very affordable, so that means I can use a lot of them. I get a lovely new brush every few paintings, and they're brilliant like that. So I have 2 water containers. When I'm traveling away, I only have one. It's just for ease, because when I'm painting at a workshop, I tend to change my water more often. When I'm sitting in a studio painting, the last thing I want to do is interrupt my painting process, so I have the 2 water containers. They're very, very shallow. As an ex-watercolorist, I used to have bucket loads of water, and I found that when I'm painting in acrylics, the least water I can have on my brushes, it was just a natural thing for me to do, was to dive in and wash my brushes in the water. And what happened was that the brush, because they retain a great amount of water, I would then transfer that accumulated water back to my mixes, and my mixes became quite watery, and it's not the look that I wanted for my acrylic paintings. So what I did was I changed into a lovely shallow container, and what that did was it forced me to use my tissues rather than my water in order to clean my brush. So now I go through a lot of tissues. The tissues are again another way for me to keep my paints nice and thick. What I can do is I can wipe off excess paint with a tissue, and then I can dive into the mix and spread that and apply the paint, and then I can come back, I can wipe that paint off, and I can dive into another colour without going into my water. I use tissues as opposed to hand towel, because again it makes the process, my painting process, slightly faster. With a hand towel, I found I needed 2 hands to tear off the bits of paper with, even though you know, they were a little bit thicker and took the paint off a bit better. I find that tissues now, I can use just the one hand to grab the tissue, and I do this kind of folding thing where it just makes it nice and easy, and it's kind of a little bit like running a mop through a squeegee, and I just take the excess paint off, and then I can dive into my mixes. All right, when I'm painting, I use a disposable glove, and I put that on my left hand. And the reason I do that is it's a leftover habit, if you like, from when I was painting in oils, just trying to avoid the paint getting all over my hand. And the reason I have it on my left hand only is because that's the hand that's taking the excess paint off, and I like to paint without a glove on this hand. Now what I do is I squeeze my paints out. Every day I come in, this is the same procedure, and particularly for the beginning of each painting. This is ivory black, and it goes to the right of my palette. I then have a phthalo blue, and this is phthalo blue cyan, and it's a really lovely sky blue colour, and I love it. And you can see when I'm squeezing them out, they're lovely thick paints. They peak, and they're just gorgeous. The next colour I have is an ultramarine blue. I love this colour. It's a real workhorse. And next colour is, this is quinacridone magenta. Again, it's quite a long, complicated name, but it's just the most beautiful, cool red. Another workhorse for me is a burnt sienna. It's a kind of it's a lovely earth colour and a gorgeous, again, a gorgeous mixing colour. My accent colour, and I'm just finding that I'm using this a lot more now. This is cadmium red light, and it again is a beautiful hue. I then have an earth yellow. This is my light ochre. And then I go into the yellows. My lovely warm yellow is cadmium yellow deep. And my cool yellow is lemon yellow. And I have my white. I use titanium white. And I love the strength of this white. It's just amazing. I have two places for my white. I have one up in this top corner, and I have another one down in this bottom left corner. Now the reason I do that is because I have, this will be my mixing white. This is for my pure whites. This is for any highlights, or if I need to just have a pure white, I dive in up here. But this area down here, this is my mixing white area, and that seems to be where I dive for my whites for most of the time. Now why is it different? It's exactly the same paint. So in order to make it my mixing white, I add a retarder to it. And this is a super retarder, and I love it because it's like a gel. And what I do is I mix it in a 2-to-1 ratio. So really there's 50% of the retarder into the white. And what I do is I just thoroughly mix that together. I get an old brush, and I just mix that, I stir that in. And it kind of curdles it, and then you just keep stirring it in, and then it brings it back to a lovely, beautiful, thick white paint again. And I don't mind if this paint gets a little bit dirty. I try and keep this one up here nice and clean for my accents, but this is the one that does all the work. And then in order, because I know where I'm going to be doing my mixes, I just spread that out and wash that off. So now I'm ready I've got all my paints out. What I would like to do is just show you my color mixing process. It seems to be the most asked question, what color is that? How did you mix that color? So I just wanted to explain how I mix my colors. So I've got my super retarder in my mixing white, and what that does is it slows down the drying process of my paint. So that gives me more time to mix my colors, and it keeps the paints nice and moist. Now the other way that I can control the drying time of my acrylic paints, because that seems to be the inherent problem with painting with acrylics, is they dry so fast. That can be an advantage and a disadvantage. So what I tend to do is I use this super retarder also in my water. So what I do is I have 2 spray bottles, and I mix the super retarder in a 1-to-10 ratio with this is just rainwater, plain cold rainwater, and I mix that in a ratio of 10-to-1. And the reason I do that is because I keep spraying my paints to keep them nice and moist. And this is the difference between having a longer window of opportunity to manipulate my colors or a shorter one. If I don't put retarder with these paints, they dry really fast because of the thin mixes. So I just give that a shake, and now that's ready to go. And I just spray this lovely mist over my palette, and I keep that there. This one here is the second water container, is just pure rainwater, and I use that mainly for cleaning my palette. It usually sits over on the side. So this is the one that I use for most of the time. Now I wanted to go through my color mixing process. It seems to be the most asked question. What color is that, or how did you make that color? And I wanted to just work through and show you how I go about doing it. So this is what I do. I have all my colors in this arrangement. So you can see that this side of my colors are dark and cool, and this side of my colors are light and warm. And I do this setup exactly the same way every single time. And the reason I do that is it speeds up my painting process. I don't have to guess where my colors are. I know where my colors are. And so this helps with this color mixing process. So what I do is I start off with, and the reason that there are blobs of white everywhere is I have allocated areas of my palette where I mix certain colors. So over here, for example, this is where I mix my oranges. So a yellow and a red together makes an orange, and I leave that there. And again, I wipe off that color into my tissue. So that means I can dip into another color now. Down here, I might have a beautiful pink, and I'll mix that pink with a gorgeous blue to get a lovely purple. Now the reason I put the retarder into my mixing white is, like I said, it slows down the drying process. But every time I dip into this mixing white and I put it into, and I mix it with my other colors, what it does is it automatically makes these other colors stay open longer. It makes them more usable for a longer period of time. So what I'm actually doing is I'm adding retarder to every single one of my mixes by just having that mixing white. The other place I mix in is this is the area that I use mostly for my colour mixing, and it is really a darker mixing area, and I make it a warm purple to start with, and I can swap and change that. I can make it warmer or cooler as I require. So I have these certain areas that I use in order to mix my colours. All right, so let's say if I put my reference, oh, this is another great tip. This is just a $2 a frame, a really cheap photo frame. It's glass, and what you do is you put your reference material in behind the glass, and you can test your colours on this all day long if you wanted to. So what I've done is I've taken some colour samples from our reference material, and I want to try and show you how I mix those colours. The first thing I do is I identify the family of colour. So if I'm going to mix this particular square, I would look at it and I would think, okay, what family of colour does that belong to? It's an orangey brown, it's a brown colour. So if I just dive into my burnt sienna colour, and I add a little bit of white to that, and I put it up there, it's pretty close to that colour. So in my head, I'm already registering that square is really a little bit of burnt sienna with a little bit of white in it. If I add too much white in it, it becomes wrong. It's a lot lighter. So it means then I have to adjust that by adding more burnt sienna to it and getting it back so it's just right again. And what I do is I kind of squint through my eyes. I lower I close my eyes so that I can, I'm cutting out the light that's coming in through my eyelashes. And what it does is it tells me, like when I squint through my eye, it tells me automatically that is way too light, whereas the other two are very close to that colour mixing. Let's move on to the next square. How would I make that colour? What family of colour is that? So what I do is I identify it belongs in the green family for me. So there are really 6 families, if you like. There's the primaries and the secondaries. So there's the red, blue and yellow, or there's green, orange and purple. Belongs in the green family. So what 2 colours do I mix to get the green? I mix a blue, and in this case I'm going to go a phthalo blue. And to me it's a cool green. So I'm going to start off with a lemon yellow, and I'll put that in and I'll mix those 2 together. Now I'll put that in there and see what it's like. Now to me it's too pastel, it's too pretty. So that means I've used the wrong yellow. So then I go to my earth yellow. When I say it's too pretty, I want to dirty it up. So I go to my earth yellow and I see what colour green that is. Now it's starting to become the right temperature. Now, is it light enough or dark? It should be lighter than that. So I go to my white and I add that to that. Now, please note when I'm mixing, I'm not going into the middle of those colour swatches. I'm going to the outside so I can judge actually how much lighter that's got to be. And you can see I did the same thing with the brown mix. So now I put that on and I say, okay, it's too light. I go back into the original mix and I can pick it up and I can start to get to a very similar colour. All right, I find that should be slightly, to me it's not as green as I've got it. So I'm going to add just a touch of purple to that and cool it right down. Now it starts to become very, very similar to that colour square. All right, so what I did was I identified the family of colour. I then went and said, is it warm enough or cool enough? And then was it light enough or dark enough? Let's do the next one. The next one is what most people would call, if I showed this to our grandkids, it's pink. How do you make pink? It's basically red with white in it. So I'm going to try, I've got 3 reds on my palette. Which red is it? I'm going to start off with the cool red and add white to it and see what that is like. Now it's not too bad, except I find that it is a little bit too cool. So I'm going to warm it up. So I'm actually going to add a fraction of my warm red to that pink mix and see what happens there. Now I'm getting around about the same color, but it's too dark, so I've got to add white to that. So I pick up a little bit of white, and these very minuscule adjustments is what makes the difference between a correct or incorrect tone. And most students, I find, they're too thick-handed, too heavy-handed when they're picking up their mixes. I'm not diving deep into the paint. I'm actually using just the tip of my brush to pick up a minuscule amount of paint. So I can adjust this and get these tones spot on. Let's identify the next color. It's starting to become a bit of a blend. To me, it's kind of a purpley brown color. So in my hair, I've already given myself a recipe, purpley brown. So that means it's purple added to brown. Here's my purple mix, and I'm going to add it to an already existing brown mix. Put it on and see how it looks. So I've just talked myself into that color mixing, a purpley brown. Now I can refine it. If it's too warm, too cool, I'd cool it down, and it starts to become, when I blur my eyes, it starts to become pretty close to the color that I'm mixing. Let's do the next one. Straight away, it belongs in the blue family, but which blue is it? To me, it's a cool blue. So I'm going to start off with my phthalo blue, which is my cool blue. And I'll put that on and I say, oh wow, it's way too dark. I've got to add more white to that. So I dive into the white, and phthalo blue is so strong that you have to keep adding more and more and more white to it. So I don't keep diving into that puddle. I take the white out, and I've got too much blue on my brush. So I don't keep going, I stop there and add white to that blue. Now I've gone the other way. So it's a kind of a push-pull. Go back to the correct value. Now I find that my blue is too pure blue. Again, I've got to try and doctor it, make it slightly dirty. So I'm just going to add a fraction of purple to that. And that tiny little bit of purple takes it away from that pure blue. And now I'm getting to that blue color. So you can see that it's a progressional thing. It's a trial and error. Now the more often you do this, the faster your painting process will become. Let's move on to the last one. It's obviously in the family of yellow. So I'm going to say that it's a warm yellow. So I'm going to add warm yellow. And if I added just pure yellow to it, it becomes too bright. So I know it's got to have white in it. When I put that on, I look at it and I think, okay, if I was, going to select paint at a paint shop, I would call that mustard yellow. So that tells me that mustard yellow is slightly an earthier yellow. So I'm going to go for, instead of using my cad yellow deep, I'm going to go for my light ochre color. So I picked up some white with the ochre, put it in, and it automatically turns it into a more earthy yellow. And then I just adjust the tone, and away we go from there. So you can see the process is very logical. Now I do this with every patch of color on my painting. I look at it, I discern which family it belongs in, and then I adjust it, whether it adjusts its value, whether it's lighter or darker, and then whether or not it's pure color or a dirty color. So that's how I mix color. Great way to learn your tones or your color mixing is to put your reference material behind some glass. Again, this is just a cheap frame. Put it behind glass, and I put it up here, and I can test my colors straight onto the glass. And if I get it wrong, I just wipe it off with a tissue. So let's say I wanted to mix a skin tone way out into the light. I look at it and I identify the family color, and it's really a light white yellow color. So there's already a recipe happening. So I put that on and I test it. Probably could be a fraction cooler than that. So I can go over to my blue and I can put that on and I can test it. Now I'm getting close. Now if that was wrong, I can just wipe that off and I can do the color mixing all over again. So I start off and I say, okay, how do you mix skin color? I think skin color is orange, so let's put that on. There's no way that that's correct. So now I can adjust it from there. So I then start going back into my yellows, and then I can cool it down a fraction. And I can test it. And when it's right, I then pick that up and I can put that on my painting. So let's say I wanted to mix a shadow area, for example. I look at it and I think, yeah, it's a ready purple color or a browny purple color. I put it on and I can test it. It's got to be redder than that, so I can add more red to my mix. Pick it up and put it on. Now I'm getting close to that color. Now I'd pick that up and I'd place it onto my painting. Let's try and make the lip color. The lip color's got to be red, hasn't it? So we'll put red on it. And when I put that on there, wow, it's way too red. So what I can do is I'll go into a pink mix, which has got a little bit of the cool red in it and a little bit of the white. And I'll put that on. and I know that's wrong, so I can wipe that off. And I put that on there and then have a look at it. It's way too light. So now I adjust it. I go in, I go darker, wipe that off again, put it on, and I look at it and think, okay, now I'm getting there. It's close to the lip color. It has a fraction of cool in it as well. I wipe that off, I can put that on, and that's way too cool. So I go back to my warm and I add that over the top of it. Now I can just play around with this all day long because it's worth getting that exact tone. Okay, so how do I mix a dark? What I do is I clean off any white of my brush. So I go into the water, I clean it off, and I then take, as soon as the brush comes out of the water, it goes through my tissue. I'm taking off the excess water. So to mix it dark, I make sure I have no white on my brush. I love ivory black. Most artists will, I've read many books and most artists have said, you know, don't use black, mix your own black. But I love it, it's great. I can use it as a neutral color. I can then warm it up or cool it down. It's a lovely base color. I rarely use black on its own, but it's a great base. So I use that as a dark. I'm going to make the dark in the hair, and I see that as a brownie dark. So put it on, no way. It's got to be cooler than that. So now I can make it a cool bluey dark, and I can then match that in. Now I can say, okay, yep, I agree with that. Or it might be a fraction too dark, so I'm just going to add a fraction of white to that, and then I can match it perfectly. If I wanted to do the skin color in shadow, what I tend to do is identify it. To me it's a purple color. So I mix up a purple, phthalo blue and cadmium red at this stage, and I mix it up, and then I adjust the value. And I'm doing this in my head. I've already looked at the reference material. Now I'm doing it in my head. And when I get that tone, I put it on and I try and match it identical, so that when I blur my eyes, I can't see the difference. So when I squint, that tone there should be way closer to what's underneath it than the original one. Then I just pick this up and I can place it, and away I go, and I paint that whole area with it. So using the reference behind glass is a great way to learn and get the correct tones. All right, so what I've done is I've paired my colors right back to 9 colors, basically. What I've done is I've got a warm, a cool, and an earth of the primary colors. So for my warms, I've got the cadmium red light, the cadmium yellow deep, and my ultramarine blue. They make up my warm colors. Then I've got my cools. I've got quinacridone magenta as my red. I've got my lemon yellow as my cool yellow, and then phthalo blue cyan as my cool blue. My earth colors are light ochre for my yellow. I've got burnt sienna for my red, and I've got ivory black. And people always question me with regards to how come you put black in as a cool blue? Well, when I mix black with white, or I mix it with yellow, or I mix it with the burnt sienna, I actually start getting purple mixes when I mix it with the red, and I start to get an earth green when I mix it with the yellow. So it has got a lot of blue pigment in it. So the only other color that I have outside of these 9 colors is my white, and really my white, I use 3 times as much white as any other color here. It gets mixed. I rarely use pure color. If I do use a pure color, it's for accents only, but most of it is for color mixing. So I combine these 9 colors and I can get any color that I need. All right, now that the primer is completely dry, I want to tape off the edge. And the reason I want to tape the edges is so that I keep a nice, clean, crisp edge of white. And that helps the framer when I take my work in. It helps the framer frame it right up to that edge. So what I do is I just use masking tape that's not too strong. This is a general purpose masking tape. And what I do is I put it right up to the line and just press it down all the way along the line, and then cut it at the end. And then just do this on all 4 sides. Now I just press that down, nice and firm. And we're ready to paint.